All right, so today I really just want to do a quick example. I'm working on a new thing in the Docker Kubernetes space, and you know how it is when you think you understood something and then you have to go back to work and then you realize you have no idea how that works. All right, so what I really wanted to do was talk about a little bit about just deploying a stateless app in Kubernetes on Docker desktop. And there's actually a couple ways you could do this. The simplest way to do this is probably just install Docker desktop. So this is on a Windows 10, but this would work with Docker desktop on a Mac too. Um, Install Docker desktop and just enable Kubernetes. The way I actually did this, I wanted to simulate a multi-node cluster. So when you run Docker desktop, it's a single node Kubernetes cluster with the worker nodes and the control plane and all that running in a single node is different containers on that node. The folks and on the Kind project actually did something different. They actually make Docker work in Docker. So they give you the ability to run multiple Kubernetes nodes in a single Docker, in a single machine. And they do that by, they're kind of using them as really lightweight virtual machines. So they put a whole bunch of code inside each deployed container, really. And that way you have all the services inside of each of these virtual nodes. So in my case, I actually set it up with 3 worker nodes and 2 control nodes. Or like I said, you can just run this with regular Docker desktop. The reason I kind of did this 3 and 2 thing, I was playing around deploying multiple replica sets higher than the number of nodes I have. So when you deploy two copies of a stateless app or any app into Docker desktop, they really all go on the same box, which is no big deal, and it's good to play with. I kind of wanted to break it apart and get a little bit more of a feel for some of the complexity, which I haven't gotten that far yet. On my 2 worker nodes, a couple times I was deploying 3 to 5 copies of the NGINX app. And in that case, I would end up, in some cases, like with 2, 2, and 1 or something on those. The network I deployed these on is actually not visible to the host. So there was really no way to test the browser. So the other thing I did was I ran the kubectl proxy. So that kubectl proxy, it turns out these deployed services are actually visible through the API server. So you can actually hit the API server endpoint. If you want to hit it from your browser on your host, though, you bring up kubectl proxy, and that creates a proxy to the API server. And then from that API server, you can reach any of the deployed services. What do? You got to install Docker desktop, and then either enable Kubernetes as part of Docker desktop, or install Kind, or one of the others. You probably could do this with something like Minikube too, but I really like Docker desktop on Windows with WSL2. It's really nice. You just do all the work in a regular Linux command line. All right, so what I did was I created, if you look back here, right, I need to build an app and I need to build a service. And the thing I wanted to do was actually create a namespace for this. So there's the default namespace or other namespaces. So I used the default name, I created a namespace called NGINX dev, and I was thinking I would create a namespace for each environment, NGINX or dev, QA, prod, right? So I was simulating that here a little bit with namespaces, because that's probably what I would do, is namespace off all those so they'd be isolated from each other. And then I created a super simple application here, which is an NGINX deployment, and it's got 2 replicas. We could actually set this to any number we want, and I just picked whatever the latest version of NGINX is. And I'm going to run the kubectl command to actually deploy this. And then the last thing I needed was a kubectl service. So I wanted to take that deployment and expose it as a service. And I'm going to put it on port 80 also, just to make everything copacetic there, right? And so this is going to be called the NGINX service, and it's going to use the NGINX deployment. It's going to be a service for the NGINX deployment. And then that was pretty much it. So I can just show you how this works. So basically all you do is you just type kubectl apply and then the file name. So I can do kubectl get deployments, right? So what I meant was all namespaces. So we can see here that I don't have any deployments of type NGINX here, and these are all the different namespaces. So Kubernetes dashboard I have installed that has a namespace, and then the regular kube system itself has a namespace. So I'm just going to clear that, and then look, I've got an NGINX 2 node here. So what I'm really going to do is just do the apply thing against this. So it's super simple. We just do kubctl apply -f NGINX 2 All right, and you can see that it created a namespace, and then it created an app for the NGINX deployment, and then it created a service, right? And so I should be able to go back to the all namespaces, and you can now see that there's an NGINX deployment sitting in the NGINX namespace, and I've got a service there. So if we went back to our little hint here, right? So that's what I did here. I did a deployment, and then I checked the namespaces. I could actually check the nodes for the replica count, so I should be able to kubectl. Well, can I just copy this? So let's just try that. I don't know if this will work because I can't remember how my terminal is set up. Copy. Oh, look at that. All right. So this, I checked the deployments, and we can see the NGINX deployment has 2 nodes, right? I set it up with 2 replicas. I can actually run the 4 node here. So if I were to do this, oop. Well, let's look. Let's try it again. Oh, that's because I put a space in the name. That was dumb. All right, so now if I go up here and I look at the deployments, I actually get 4 nodes, right? So that's super easy, right? It just spun up 2 extra containers. I went from 2 NGINX servers to 4. And so we're up. So the only thing that's a little weird here, that's the replica count that we saw there. I'm just looking at my notes. We can actually get details about this. So we could do, we can do a kubectl describe on this deployment. And you can see the details about this deployment, and this is kind of small on the screen, I apologize, but basically if you want to know what the deployment looks like, you can see here we've got 4 replicas, right? That's this line right here. And it's doing rolling update, which is kind of cool, so as we redeploy this, we'll actually do rolling updates. All right, and then if I want to know how many pods are provisioned, I can actually do kubctl get pods NGINX dev. You can see now I actually have 4 pods running, right? I had 2 for 2.5 minutes, and then I ended up with 2 for 75 seconds because of the extra 2 I spun up. So I could rerun the 2 script there, and it would pull down 2 of those pods. All right, so that's up, and then I got a service too. If we go back and we look at this picture, right? So I created a namespace, and then I created a deployment, and then I created a service. But in another window, I've actually got the kubectl proxy running. But it turns out that I need to expose this deployment through the APIs, through the API server, through the kubectl proxy, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste again here. And I paste. All right. Now that I have access, because the proxy's running, I have access to the API server. So I can see here that this here, I went into the namespace NGINX dev, and I looked at all the services are deployed, and we can see that there, I exposed this one here, NGINX dev HTTP, in the previous. So that means I should be able to actually get to NGINX dev HTTP as a URL using the API server. So this is a way for me not to have to stand up a load balancer or go to a cloud or something like that. So here I'm going to go over here, and you can see here I did local 8001 API v1 namespaces, NGINX dev, which is the namespace I deployed into. And then if I expose something in that namespace, you basically do services slash and then this weird thing. So this would actually be the expose name, right? So this is the namespace we're in, and this is the name I exposed it under with the expose command. If we come back over here, you can actually see that I named this thing NGINX, right here, NGINX dev HTTP. So I took the NGINX deployment and I exposed it as dev NGINX dev HTTP. And so if I were to just put this weird HTTP colon and then the name of the exposure and then slash proxy slash, I don't know why they did this syntax, but it works great. So this is actually NGINX. So what I ended up doing here, right, is I created a YAML file that basically lets me deploy the namespace, the pods, and the service all in one command. And then I exposed that service, and then I hit it through the API server, so I didn't need to stand up any funky load balancers or anything. The other thing you can do here is you can actually just, I'm going to delete everything. So I created a service, a pods, a service, and and a namespace. If I delete the namespace, everything in it goes. So I don't actually have to roll back all those deployment, all those. Oh, that was not what I meant to do. Here, copy. So it turns out it's sort of like a resource group in Azure. If you blow away the resource group, everything goes with it, and you don't have to blow away everything independently. All right, so I'm going to hit this, and the namespace is being deleted. This is actually going to take a while. It's got to undeploy all the pods, and then it's going to take turn it delete the entire deployment, delete the service, and then delete the namespace. So that's it. That's what I wanted to show you. Have a great day.